Okay, so it's top of the hour, so we're going to go ahead and get started again. We're going to bring back T from the opening remarks. I think a lot of people may know him. He's the CEO and CPO of PMO Advisory. He's also an associate professor at Montclair State University, author of several publications and books, which he'll probably tell you a little bit more about, especially with this presentation. So we'll let T get started.
Thank you so much, Anthony. And thank you, everybody, for still staying with us on a Friday afternoon, at least 3 o'clock in the East Coast. So, what I want to talk about today is really dive a little bit deeper into project management and nonprofit management and why it truly matters. I also want to make a call to everyone here, and of course, even broader than that, about of creating an ecosystem, a forum for all of us to contribute and share different ideas. My hope is that nonprofit project management to me is a very important topic simply because nonprofit truly matters. In our current situation in the United States, to be honest, unless something is done about it, a lot of the nonprofit organization may not survive or will have to wiggle down on their missions and their passions. So my hope is that this forum, or this is the start of a forum in which we can reinvigorate and we could figure out how to do more with less and still minimizing the impact around us. So the learning objectives are pretty straightforward. I'm going to talk about the nonprofit sector and why project management really matters. We also look at the project management challenges at the nonprofit, at least some of the basic essential ones. We are going to talk a little bit about the fundamentals of project management, because I don't necessarily assume here everybody here are project management professionals. You may be working in projects and have some of these experiences. And then also look ahead at what PMO Advisory is currently doing and how you can also contribute to our work, and collectively we can make a difference. So a little bit about me. My name is T Wu. I go by T. So, and generally I actually prefer Professor Wu over Dr. Wu. I have two main jobs. I am the CEO of PMO Advisory, and I'm also a tenured professor, associate professor at Montclair State University. Occasionally, I also teach at other schools as well. And I do have some of the certifications in project management, and you could see my education background. What I'd like to people to how they think about me is essentially I like to believe I am a connector between three sort of major areas. One is the practical working. I have 30 plus years of experience. I love project management. I've been applying it almost since day one, since I graduated from college. My second world is I like to participate and contribute to thought leadership in creating standards and guidelines for project managers. And it is a bit academic in that sense. It could be a bit Ivy Tower, but I like to get the ideas out there and then help professionals to pick and choose and to tailor various practices and make it work in their organization. And then my third role is a university professor, partly into research, but mostly into teaching and bringing up at least what I consider to be the next generation of good project managers. So you could see that quite a bit from my volunteering activities as well. So let's start with a little bit background. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because I think Phoenix, Aaron, as well as Sapri covered many of this. But here are a couple of the statistics that stands out to me why this sector matters. First of all, over 50% of Americans donate to charity, some kind. About 25% or 64 million Americans volunteer. So it's a huge population of people. The direct economic impact is about 6 to 6.5% of the US GDP. And what saddens me is this number will likely go down, at least in the near future. Nonprofit is the largest employment, third largest employment sector in the US. And there are about 1.25 million nonprofit jobs in the United States. And there are around 10 millions of these organizations in the world. However, nonprofit struggles. I've been working with nonprofit My first one that I truly got involved leading a big project was at Consumer Reports or Consumer Union up in Yonkers, New York in around 2001, so over 20 some years ago. And that was a fabulous experience. We'll share that on a different day. But most nonprofit struggles deeply. And I look at their projects and I look at their execution. There's just so many areas in which project management can make a difference. And one of the big numbers that stood out at me is that nonprofit employees actually have a higher um, uh, quit rate than in for-profit companies. The retention nonprofit is especially difficult because partly I think everybody here knows, and it's not a surprise, that the compensation can be perhaps lower than the for-profit. But people didn't quit because of probably lower compensation. They often quit because the workload is so heavy. And that, of course, impacts projects as well. Anecdotal suggests that even in the projects that look successful, feel successful, there are just a overuse of heroic effort, meaning people did everything they can to make sure the project doesn't slip. The problem with heroic effort, while on one hand we all applaud these heroes for doing what they do, on the other side is heroes also cause burnout, hence over time attributing to the high or the low retention rate and the high quit rates. So why nonprofit matters? Everybody already discussed it. I just want to mention that nonprofits provide such vital services in our country. And for a lot of people, it is often the last line of defense. Without it, there is nothing. It just falls flat to the ground. So in that sense, for us in nonprofit who want to build a better, richer, more harmonious world, this truly matters. And why good project management matters is mainly because nonprofit projects face intense and sometimes fairly unique challenges that you just don't see. For example, working with a volunteer workforce is difficult. Volunteers typically have other jobs, have other priorities. And so, consequently, for nonprofit project professionals, these are some of the challenges. And so, based on my experience, I have over 30 years of project management experience, about 24, give or take, years working in nonprofit of various kind. What I found is what makes nonprofit particularly difficult for project and sort of at a big picture level is nonprofit professionals have a greater appetite for work because of their passion, their mission. But they also, of course, have to confront the limitations of capabilities as well as resource availabilities. Nonprofit often have difficulties making really strong choices. And this was a question that I even asked Phoenix, how do you give up on the sunk cost? This is partly because everything is important. This is because very often, if you are the last line of defense, anything you can add to it makes the world or makes that situation better. So it is genuinely difficult to make those choices. And as much as nonprofit cares, very much cares about the people, most nonprofit I work with have fabulous, not so much in the compensation side, but on the benefit side. Attrition rate is just high. And as I dive into this area, it's just because people are often tired. And also, by the way, passion works both ways. You could be very passionate, but if the nonprofit isn't doing exactly to meet up your expectation of that passion, you may also want to leave. So passion in this case is a double-edged sword. And finally, nonprofits face far more severe resource limitations. And it's not even the limitations, sometimes it's just the uncertainties that funds may not materialize. People who make commitments, that committed fund may not show up, or as we're currently seeing in our country, funds that may already be committed suddenly disappear and evaporates. So, and that comes with very little warning. So that's the big picture scenario that I see in the project management space. And that's why good project management is important. So What I will discuss today is a little bit very quickly what is project management, because I do have my sort of maybe not unique, but at least my way of framing the project management. And whether you agree or disagree, you can let me know later. But I'd like to share that, and hopefully that can help you frame your problems and projects as well. Next, we'll talk about, what's different about nonprofit project management, a little bit more detail, but I have to say I'll probably be skimming over some of these because I think Sapri and Aaron talked about that particularly well. And then lastly, I want to share what PMO Advisory doing. PMO Advisory is a hybrid company. For those of you that were here earlier, I briefly mentioned that why I started PMO Advisory in 2012. I really thought about forming PMO Advisory as a nonprofit. But at the time, we were thinking about doing trainings in project management, especially portfolio management. This is sort of our main topic often. We figured that nobody on the Wall Street will hire us if we are a nonprofit doing, portfolio management training. So it is a for-profit company, but we always have had a strong hybrid mission. And many of you, for example, attending this summit for free is a part of our mission to promote and also in this case to advance nonprofit project management. And finally, along as we share how we're doing things and some of the sort of the ecosystem that we are hoping to create, we'd love for you to get involved and contribute as well. So there'll be quite a bit of that as well. By the way, feel free to jump in with your questions in the Q&A. I do have both of those boxes sort of open in front of me. So I prefer to answer questions in the context than to wait for some future moment. And obviously, they have to recover the context. So let's talk about what is project management. The discipline of project management can be viewed in many different ways, and it can be organized in many different ways. Many of you are probably familiar with PMI framework. I was a team lead for the ISO, International Organization of Standardization, and they have their standard on project management. For me, there are three primary dimensions that defines this discipline. One is there are certain key principles that we hold dear. And while not all principles have to be executed to perfection all the time, most of them apply almost to all the projects. Second is look at the processes. And this is where I think a lot of other framework makes project management more complicated than it is. And here I'm trying to simplify it so you'll get a flavor of that. And then the third, the knowledge domain. These are different pockets of different deeper experiences or knowledge that we can bring to bear to execute on projects of different kinds and sizes. Incidentally, I should mention that people sometimes say, well, there are also different methods or approaches, and that is absolutely true. Today, traditional project management probably has now receded as agile adaptive methods has taken over many of the different sectors, for example, in software engineering or application making. But traditional project management still serves as a strong foundation. But despite how you look at the different methods, and there are easily over 200 different methods in Agile alone, for example, I see them as just methods or approaches. What they are is a different compilation of using the principles, the processes, and the domains to come together to solve their project problem. So in this conversation today, we're not really going to talk much about the different methods or approaches, because to me, it is sort of finding, tailoring, and customizing the optimal methodology for your organization or for that type of project. So let's start, what is a principle? For those of you who has been a PMP for a very long time, you probably remember in the project management body of knowledge, there are different processes, and depending on which version of the PMBOK or the project management body of knowledge, I think that one of the latest one has around 47 different processes. PMI has actually started shifting away from the processes because, to be honest, not too many people remember the 47 processes. In any normal day, probably still remember them right after you've taken the test. PMI has shifted away and started moving toward the direction of international standard organization of standardization, and because they are more of a narrative or principle base. So a principle here is a fundamental truth that you hold very dear, that impacts pretty much most of the project, most of the time, and most of the principles also at works. For us, these provides important guidelines, things that we also always need to think about in the back of our mind as we execute on projects. And there are different frameworks out there with different principles, but I found these 8 to be particularly useful, at least in my practice of project management. Number 1 is focusing on performance and results. Project management is not an ivory tower exercise. It is about getting things done and delivering results. So consequently, the importance of project manager to razor focus on delivering the deliverables or the outcomes or achieving the performance is vital. So always ask yourself, is this work adding value to what I'm doing? The second big part of project management, and by the way, these are sort of in this prioritization order. The second big principle I try to follow is the very reason we have project manager or project management is so we can minimize surprises and minimize uncertainty. So while we may not be able to, all of us in the project, working on a large project, to look at the next bend in the road or the bends further down the journey of the project, it is the job of project manager to anticipate as much as possible. And in this case, positive surprises and negative surprises are both actually not great. Because in risk management, I'm sure many of you have learned that there are opportunities and threats. Well, opportunities, even if it's a positive surprise, if we know it earlier, we can now leverage it more for our purpose. So one of the big goals of project management, and one of the biggest reason of having especially strategic project management, is trying to minimize that surprise. The third, of course, is sort of the bread and butter. Project managers need to manage responsibly the resources that's entrusted to them and the funding. And of course, the resource part, by the way, I also look at time as a resource. And there are other resources like knowledge, for example, right? So it is the job of project manager to manage these resources given as inputs and to do them well. Number 4, this is where methodology do come in, because I think all of us agree there are many ways to get things done. And there's generally not a one single solution that is suitable for every project in organization. And depending on the size of your organization, the complexity of the project, this is where organization may want to adopt certain methods. Sapri, for example, talk about the PMO. PMO can be entrusted with coming up with these right methods. Number 5, all projects are done through people. Now, I realize there are machines, there are robots, there's artificial intelligence, there are equipments that can help us done. But people at the end of the day are, at the very minimum, the chief operator of those machines and equipments. And people require a degree of motivation, incentive to do well. One of the big rules of thumb that I try to follow when I was leading projects in corporations, I tried to get to know my direct reports. Why are they involved in this project? Hopefully it's more than a paycheck. And if it is a paycheck, then at least I know that. Because by knowing what they want and what's in it for them, I could now try to make their goals also a part of the overarching goals of the project, in that we all work in synchronicity. And that by empowering people and motivating them, you definitely get far more bang for the buck in getting great performance. Number 6, communication. One of the biggest challenge of project, especially when you get to larger projects, one of the projects I managed, I remember one of the ERP implementation, I think we had over 800 people we invite to our status meeting. So this is not to say even all the doers. The meeting was so big and it was a global project. We even have to have the meeting in 3 different time zones: North, South America, Middle East, Africa. in Europe, and then the Asia Pacific and or Australia, right? So it is all about communication. I think many of us remember the communication channel formula from the PMP days. If you know that the number of people just runs away, and this is not that project manager can manage everything, every communication channel well. It is, but providing that diligence can head off so many problems. Communication, by the way, in another large program that I ran, actually for my university, Montclair State University, that I ran some years ago, we were upgrading the entire network infrastructure of the university. And Montclair is about 20,000 students at the time, maybe 5,000 faculty and staff. At the end of the program, we sent out a survey. One of the questions was around communication. And the communication question was essentially, did we communicate too much, too little, or just right? And it was funny. It was a third saying we communicate too much, a third say we communicate too little, and a third said we did right. So I just took the average and we did well. But the point of communication is it's one of those things that's sort of death by 1,000 little slices. It may not quite kill you, but it's going to be quite painful. So definitely try to manage that. Number 7, think and manage up. Now, this doesn't apply to some of the projects, especially the smaller one, but this applies to the strategic project or the ones that truly making a difference, as Phoenix talked about in one of the 6 questions. And the reason being is that very often your customer who giving you, or your sponsor giving you the requirements, etc., may not actually be the ultimate sponsor. So for project management, especially working on strategic transformational type projects, it is often worthwhile to look at the next level and the goals of the next level. And not that you necessarily want to go play your project to fit every one of these requirements, but you know the sense of direction. In this case, as Phoenix talked about, a directional goal. Now you know where that direction, where that north that you're trying to march to. So it's a strategic skill within project management. In number 8, fact-based management. This is very practical. In project management, we have to report status, we have to report performance. And let's face it, for those of you who worked in project management, you know sometimes it is not very pretty. The fact, however, is that we, as a project manager, I like to say, is that we could sort of, I don't want to use the word lie, but we could pivot, we could position things differently, but to ourselves, we cannot. So we, fact number 1, we have to know our own facts well. Even if we decide to pivot, communication with, let's say, a donor or some other audience, we have to know the truth ourselves. Because by sort of confusing that truth and lies and exaggerating or undermining certain progress, we no longer know what the truth is. And that not knowing the fact can lead project astray very, very quickly. And I think many of us are seeing that in our country as we speak on that particular point. So fact-based management, at the very minimum, with yourself, with your team, with the people that truly matters, is something that I believe should be one of the key principles. So that's on the principle side. So these 8 principles permeates at least most of the project, if not all the project, almost all the time. So let's look at the second dimension, which is really the life cycle and processes. Now, people do call me a bit of a traditionalist, and I admit I agree with that, because I actually like life cycle. I think life cycle as a set of processes is something we inherently understand, probably better than almost any other processes. Right? All of us can probably remember days when we were younger, and we could probably look at our older parents or grandparents and see where they're going. Project in many ways falls into the same spectrum. Their time when it starts, think about birth. Eventually it gets executed next, and eventually it retires. It goes through a life cycle in its own. So one of the thoughts that I have for a very long time is, how do we simplify all these processes, 50 processes? It's not even the number, it's the arbitrariness of the processes that comes into play. So what I try to do in my approach to project management is try to blend these two. So I tend to think of projects in 5 generic phases: ideation, initiation, preparation, execution, transition, and closure. Ideation is, how the project come about in the first place. As many of you know, I do a lot of work in portfolio management. Portfolio management is heavily involved in the ideation phase. And there you could go into many specific activities from prioritization, developing business case, authorization, etc. Now, some of the junior project manager may not be truly that involved in the ideation stage. I get that, because you could be given a project and say, T, go execute. But that's fine, but it'd still be worthwhile to know what are the reasons why you're doing this project. Because without knowing it, you cannot refrain, as Phoenix will say. The next phase is initiation. Initiation is an important phase. Actually, to me, is one of the most important phase, because this is where the monkey goes on the back of the project manager. Ideation is usually started by a business, a customer, and very often business cases are written by them, which means there's really not enough dose of reality of what it takes to get done. Briefly, before we're chatting between the sessions, the best strategy in the world could utterly fail because execution failed. Before we were chatting about the California high-speed railway. And that is absolutely true. So as a project manager, one of your first job taking on the project is saying, can I do this? Is this reasonable? Am I giving enough resource or budget to do this project? And that happens in initiation. Preparation is when you do different levels of planning. In traditional project management, let's face it, the level of planning is pretty detailed. In Agile, and depending on which type of Agile, you could be pretty shallow. You just want to set a direction, have a sense of the sprints or the iterations, and you want to march forward. But you want to do that nonetheless before you get into the execution phase. And then, of course, that's where the bulk of the work done. And if it's iterative in Agile, there could be multiple iterations. Then eventually there will be transition and closure. All projects should come to an end. Processes are it came from a book that Brian Williamson, one of our executive director, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, so he sends his apologies. And I wrote back in 2019. And we define processes as a series of deliberate actions or steps taken in order to achieve a particular outcome or output. And in many ways, project management are composed of many of these processes. So what we try to do is create a simplified logical process framework. And if you look at this, we actually just came up with one process per phase. And the, in brackets, say KD is depends on the knowledge domain. So each of these phase has, every project that goes through these phases have only 5 processes per knowledge domain. So in that case, it's a bit more easier to remember. It's more intuitive instead of, I think, a little bit arbitrary processes that other standards tend to lay out. And I'm not going to go through the slides in great detail. We'll share the presentation at the in about a week's time after we distribute the recording with these decks, so you could see it. But at the different phase, there are specific outcomes, which I already talked about, and there are some of the key deliverables. Last thing, the third big dimension are the knowledge domains. Now, knowledge domain is what I consider to be a concrete and specific management area that occurs frequently on project. It's not 100%. For example, if you have a small project that doesn't require external resources, then supply chain or procurement doesn't come into a play. On the other hand, for larger projects, chances are most of these knowledge domains do apply. They go by different names depending on standards. In PMI standards, they sometimes use the word knowledge areas, performance domain, that you see that in the program and portfolio management standards. So they go by slightly different name, but the idea is pretty simple. Project management as a discipline is a relatively new one, and we sort of beg, borrow, and steal, as I jokingly say, from the different fields of management and business. In our emphasis, and reason I say the emphasis is we're putting together a book on this, so later we'll share, but there are 15 most common domains. And here on the right side, you could see what these 15 are. Now, it's not necessarily these 15 are the definitive 15, there could be more. And hopefully, as we put together a book later, I'll share in the future, we'll even expand on additional domains. One thing I do want to call out that I started thinking and looking at the time or schedule, people, costs, and other as all resources. They're different resources, but these are essential resources for project. So you could see we call R1, 2, 3, and 4. That's just resource 1, resource 2, resource 3, resource 4. Okay. Now, I just laid out a big umbrella. So if people were doing math in your head, you could say, well, T, you're saying there are 15 domains, and each domain have 5 processes aligned with each of the 5 phases of the project. So there are 75 processes. That is a lot of processes to bring to bear on projects. And the answer, of course, is absolutely true. This is when practitioner project managers need to think strategically. And these are some of the same rules I tell my students all the time. Number one, you have to apply project management judiciously. I know it sounds funny as a project manager and in a nonprofit project management summit, I'm essentially saying you don't necessarily need to always apply rigorous project management. The reason being is project management is an overhead. It's additional layer of management, and it costs money, it costs time, it costs expertise. So what you want to make sure is that the value you can derive from project management is far more than the cost. And this value can be measured in many different ways. Sometimes it's just cost saving from doing things more effectively or efficiently. Sometimes it's helping to make those adaptive decisions or technical decisions that Phoenix talks about that can be so difficult to make without some structured discussions. Other times, the value could be that the project is so mission critical, it cannot afford to fail. If it fails, our mission failed. So for all of us here thinking about applying project management, the number one rule I think is that you have to look at, does it make sense? So that's rule number one. Rule number two is don't apply these 75 processes on every single project. Heck, if the project is small, might as well just roll up your sleeve and go do the work instead of applying all these processes. These processes are live. And to make it work, project professionals have to tailor and customize them for your organization to make it work. In small projects, for example, one of the best practice I think in project management is creating a project charter. I know Phoenix may not necessarily agree on that point. She says she doesn't do project planning, but I still like to do project charter. Project charter talks about why we're doing a project. What is at stake? What are the resources given? What is the time frame? And it's a general agreement on what to do. But a charter doesn't have to be a 20-page document. It could be as simple as a back of a napkin. So I used to evaluate PMOs of the year for PMI. And believe it or not, charter appears a lot in those submissions talking about how robust their PMO is. Because having that agreement upfront means people went through the diligence of at least going through the thinking, saying, you know, this is what I want to gain, this is all I'm willing to spend, this is how much time I have, and these are the resources that we have that can drive this project to successful completion. Even if it's just a half-page charter, and I've seen half-page charter, that's great. So that's tailoring. So again, doesn't need to apply a rigorous method that is ask every question on the planet, because if the project's small, might as well just go do that. So tailoring is paramount. Number three, and this is more for organizations looking for project management to help them. Project management is a journey. We PMO Advisory provides a lot of project management training. And occasionally I get a customer asking me, you know, T, we need project management training for our staff. We'd like to spend about, you know, I think we only could for about 4 hours, maybe a day. But here's the long list of things we want to achieve. Well, I'm sorry, that doesn't fit the journey profile. We could give you an introduction to this entire list, but chances are there's not enough time to go through these nooks and crannies, the opportunities and challenges, the good practices and the best practices, applying them. So it is important for all of us to think of project management more as a journey than as an instant gratification. So what is nonprofit project management? Well, I thought about this really hard because especially we started a whole summit. But in short, what I believe is that the discipline of project management is very much the same at the big picture. It is about getting things done effectively and efficiently. It is about trying to do more with less. It is about trying to deliver consistency of results, hopefully repeated, so across multiple projects. And of course, all that serves as a critical capability for delivering change and newness, whether it is a for-profit company or nonprofit company. But however, what makes nonprofit project management unique is at the detailed level. Take budget, for example. In most corporations, the budget is approved, and generally you could count on having that budget. In nonprofit, for example, at least a bigger project, you probably have a combination of budgets coming from operating budget, coming from grants, maybe a bit of donation. And all of that makes managing that budget so much more difficult, especially if there are compliance in terms of reporting the budget and the expenses. And sometimes budget even comes with restriction. One of the projects I manage at Montclair State University, for example, there was a state grant that could only be used for X. There was a strategic the pool fund that the university reserved, but that only could be used for a certain specific purpose. So even taking budget, there's multiple complexities to managing that. So we have to look at nonprofit at a more granular level to find these true unique challenges. This is a table that I quickly summarize. Again, I'm not going to read through the entire table, but to show you at least some of these major attributes and where they're different. We talk about already staffing, for example, in which generally in for-profit organization, you have employees, you have hired consultants. In nonprofit, you probably have a combination, staff, consultants, and volunteers. Success metrics can be vastly different. In for-profit organization, inevitably one of the major indicator are performance, financial performance indicators. In nonprofit, not that you necessarily want to blow the budget or anything like that, but a lot of your focus is on did we achieve the impact that we set out to make. So if you're listening to this as recording, you may want to pause here and just to take a closer look at the slide. The other thing about knowledge domain is I create a slide for those who are not that familiar with project management. So something you could pull out and take away when we share the slide. This is sort of a very quick summary of the 15 knowledge domains here. So this is meant as a pull-out slide. But again, what we consider is these 15 domains to be relevant to projects, especially nonprofit setting, most of the time. Okay. So going to now the last part, what are we doing? We as in PMO Advisory. So here are 5 things that we are currently working on, and many of them can use your help as well. So first, we're writing actually a book. A lot of the things that Anthony, before you met, and I and a bunch of whole other people are working together on creating this book, and I'll plan to share the book freely, at least digitally. We're also having a PM today. For those of you who may follow us, you may see that. So that'll give you some idea. Our plans to compile them on a regular basis, also share it as a book. We're also developing a portal website dedicated to this area, and we're hoping all of you can contribute. We create a LinkedIn group on LinkedIn for the nonprofit project leaders. We're organizing this summit, and our plan is to organize it perhaps twice a year, one in spring and another in fall. And today, by the way, is not the quite last day, but almost the last day of the National Volunteer Week. So many thanks to those of you who volunteers. And lastly, as a part of our consulting, we actually create a free tool that comes with a more detailed report that we'd be happy to share and even spend time with nonprofits to help them move in the right direction. So dive deeper into each of these areas. And by the way, again, we'll be sharing this deck, so the URL or the QR codes here is not something you have to do right away. But for the nonprofit book, there will be 5 parts to the book. Now, in the first edition, it may actually contain 4 parts because we're not sure if the part 4 is going to make it. So it's 5 parts instead of the 6 parts that we have. But what we want to do is capture and summarize a good body of work in project management, and then put out what's different about nonprofits so people can think about and apply to their organization. In part 2, for example, we plan to come up with a couple of common projects in nonprofit and have sort of a mini walkthrough on how to do and apply project management to a simple project, to a more moderate project, and to a more complex project. Our plan is to actually update this book annually with the latest articles. That's going to come from the next source that we're going to talk about. And of course, updating with the latest findings and concepts from the field of project management. Our goal is to have this book ready, originally really by the summer, but I have to say that may be a little aggressive. So here I cheat a little bit and just move it to fall of 2025. So you could scan the QR code to join the waitlist. Once it is ready, we'll share that and people can then download it. The second book that I briefly mentioned that we're going to put together is the PM Today. For those of you who follows me on LinkedIn, you know we have a newsletter since February. And currently we're releasing new short essays, articles, insights about twice weekly. And some of them we like so much that we are creating them into podcasts as well as video casts. So you can join those as well. So here, click on this link or take a look at this QR code and you could just subscribe. By the way, I want to mention, and this is somewhat taking advantage of my colleagues, because of the LinkedIn functionality limitations, we're using the LinkedIn newsletter. It is under my name, so it's not under PM Advisory as a company. And most of these has been created by Anthony, who's also on this call, as well as by Brian Williamson. If you have ideas you want to share, publish it under my name. We will try to give everybody the due credit that is, of course, properly due. So I just want to mention that. Nonprofit project management website. We are still building the website. You could visit it now. It's in beta stage, just not really ready for prime time. Otherwise, I'll share more here. We're hoping to get it more ready, but just like other nonprofits, I guess we also got caught up in our own activities. Here, our goal is to share different ideas, articles, book reviews, publication I often read, research, project management research. If those ideas are suitable for nonprofits, we'll probably share them here as well. So we want to use this as sort of an umbrella ecosystem to create information portal for nonprofit project management professionals. So I'm hoping that people here may want to contribute. And you can go to visit our website. Later we'll talk about how you can contribute. But for now, feel free to just share, send an email to me. And again, each article we will give people the due credit. If there are frequent enough volunteers who want to contribute their articles, we'd be happy to create a WordPress account just for you to contribute directly. So all our sites, by the way, are in WordPress. The next is the LinkedIn group. This is something we just started literally last week. So right now it has really not open to the world, even though we started posting things in there just to warm up the LinkedIn group. We're so passionate about this field that we believe nonprofits need a place to congregate, and LinkedIn provides a good professional forum. So it's an open public group. Anyone can join. Feel free to join us. Right now, there's not a lot in there, but our hope is that as we have new ideas, as we have new articles, we will distribute it partly through this channel as well. And of course, this forum on LinkedIn is designed to have no advertisement. People can't sell things. So there hopefully shouldn't be, people pitching the different sales selling their gadgets and products and services. We will pitch, in our case, our summits, but our summits are free. So that's a little bit different for the nonprofit leaders. So please join us there as well as another mechanism. The nonprofit summits, this very summit itself is something we like to organize twice a year. This is the spring, and then we already have the fall dates already aligned, in which will be on November 20th, 2025, be from 11 to 3 p.m. So for those of you that's interested in joining, please look, we're going to start a wait list for that pretty soon. And once we have that ready, you can, of course, join for free. The last thing that we have done is around the consulting side. We realize that there are a lot of good tools out there, but they require far more time and also knowledge to complete. So what Brian and I earlier this year created a quick tool. It has about 18 meaty questions, and then there are a couple of demographic questions. The question, it takes about 15 to 30 minutes to complete. And we evaluate the results based on these dimensions: the strategic dimension, the organizational, the process, and the project environment. As you fill it out, you'll have a quick score immediately. It's normalized on a scale of 1 to 100. So 100 means you're doing great. 0 obviously means you're doing very badly. And then we'll follow up, we'll analyze the result and send you a more detailed report, and with the opportunity to even request a free meeting with us to go over those results. So our hope is to help your organization start moving in the right direction. So all of these have different components you can get involved. We create a small landing page for those of you who want to be more involved, either sharing your ideas, contributing to different articles. By the way, we are always looking for good speakers, and that's true across all our summits, so not just Nonprofit Summit. If you have ideas, if you have something that you think that can help others, please let us know. And we can try to slot you, for example, into the fall summit as well. So you could scan this QR code for this page that we created, but once we share the deck, you also have the links here as well. Oh, lastly, I should mention, we do have a very vibrant advisory board that helps us shape not just the Nonprofit Summit, but all the other summits as well. What we believe is the summits, especially making them short into this 4-hour segment, is just sort of the sweet spot for people to have enough time to dive deeper into a topic, to get absorbed into it, but it's also not so long that you get mentally too tired. So we hope we achieve that as well. Here's just a pitch for our future summits. As I mentioned in the kickoff, we make a lot of our summits free for nonprofits. All our summits are actually free for students and educators. So these are the next 6 summits that's coming up, mostly in 2025, but also going to 2026. So you could see that our next summit is around portfolio management on May 30th. We are planning a new summit for the first time on project management career transition. This is because we believe project management is such a valuable profession for people who, frankly, are now being laid off. This is partly because a lot of us, even if not project manager, traditional project managers, have some level of project management skills. So there's a lot of reusable skills. And number 2 is, as the world is sort of being flattened by AI, because I'm sure people have came across different articles, management companies are cutting out management layers because of technology to make communication more effective, which is great. The bad part is people are being laid off even in the management layers. But that actually gives the rise to the need of project managers, because at the end of the day, work are still done through people. So given these 2 trends that we're seeing, we're planning a summit around the different tips for people who are considering project management as a career. And that is actually free for nonprofits and also free for students. And then we have a more technical summit around complex project and program management. We have follow that, the nonprofit project management, again, in the fall of 2025. And then one of our sort of broadest topic around business execution. And this is partly where my passion is. For those of you who know me, you know that I always like to say ideas are great, but can we get something done first, right? And that is through the idea of business execution. And then our final summit, which is really the beginning of the next year, is around rising to the top, becoming a chief project officer. In project management career path, that is the apex, sort of the aspirational mountaintop that we all want to climb to. So we have a career development summit dedicated to that topic. So that's all I have. The key takeaways, of course, is nonprofit is a significant contributor to our society. Nonprofit projects face unique and significant challenges, and project management is one of those disciplines that can truly help address these challenges. And lastly, is project management is a journey. And I hope that all of you can join us on this journey to improve project implementation and nonprofit organizations. So with that said, if there are questions, I know I just go on. It's a very dense slide. My apologies. And thank you so much for joining us today. So I'm open to, by the way, for those of you who want my information, I'll keep this slide on. So any question about project management, about nonprofit project management, or about what we're doing? Good, thank you. So now I could breathe. Anthony,
Thanks, T.
back to you, I guess.
Thanks, T. I think we both have, we've worked a lot with nonprofits recently, and I think the reason why nonprofits, I think, are a passion to you and to me is it's like you feel like you're working with somebody and they're making a difference in the world. And that's, you know, they have, like they've said many times throughout the day, and I think everybody here could appreciate it, is that they have a passion, deep passion for what they do.
Yes. You know, here's a quick story, and I know I may go over by just 1 minute. Well, actually, we're still not quite 4 o'clock. My first major project was at a company I mentioned earlier. And it was such a good experience. It was interesting because of the nonprofit passion. They came up with 34 projects they want to implement in about less than 3 months. And the deadline was pretty firm because of the seasonal cycle of things. And when I first took on that project to lead that program, really, it's not project, it's more program management, I'm thinking we're in trouble. We could never get 30-some projects done in 3 months' time. And by the way, they were also looking for a new boss. So in that, they actually even hire a new executive director. The first task is we spent a lot of time about the first 2 weeks trying to wiggle down what we have to do. And people fought tooth and nail, but eventually we got down to 10 projects. Now, even in my mind, I'm thinking we're dead. 10 projects, now you have less than 3 months to do. That is impossible. But we put together the structure, the people were passionate, and the execution was so much more efficient and faster and better than what I expected when I compared to the for-profit world that I came from, at least at that moment in my career, that it was astonishing. And when we launched those 10 projects, I jokingly said we launched the 10 project plus a baby, because one of the project was a web complete redesign. And the webmaster released the new design to the world at 7 p.m. in the evening, went home, gave birth to a baby at 2 a.m. the next day. And at 8 o'clock on next day morning, we celebrated the 10 project launches plus a baby. And that was one of the most powerful experience I ever had working in the field of project management. And it truly shows where passion meets good management, what you can truly do.
Yeah, exactly.
So on that note, thank you, everybody. I see the comments. Very much appreciated. Thank you so much for sharing your Friday afternoon with us. I hope you found this summit to be useful, informative, and hopefully helpful and hands-on. We'll be sharing the recording in about a week's time. We'll share all the PowerPoint decks in PDF format, so you have all the links as well. And if you enjoy this, please spread the word. We'd love to see more people joining in our next session in the fall on November 20th. So thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful day as well as a wonderful weekend. Thank you.